So I want to welcome all of the RSHMs today, all of the SHM extended family. We're so delighted to have you, and many of our partners for justice that are here that we don't normally have with us on our Province Day. So would the partners for justice or our extra visitors, could you put your hands up just so that we will welcome you very specially? And we hope that you will enjoy your day today. Sister Veronica Brand, as you know, is our representative at the UN of our NGO, and she will be with us for the day, and we want to give her the most time possible so that we will use the least time possible with extraneous things today. Now I'm going to call on Sister Kathy Mignot to introduce Sister Veronica, because Sister Kathy Mignot is our JPIC coordinator, and she has spent time at the UN with Sister Veronica, so we couldn't find a more appropriate person to introduce her.
Thank you, Joan. Good morning. I have a very strong voice, so this is problematic for me. I'm really honored to be able to introduce Veronica Brand today. I realize, though, that I didn't know a lot of the normal things that are included in the introduction of a featured speaker, okay? So I have to ask Veronica, and this is embarrassing for me because I lived with her for 3 years and I never knew these things. Veronica received her Bachelor of Science in Physics from Marymount Tarrytown in New York. She did her master's degree in social anthropology from Fordham University. And I think most of all, she's proud of her graduate certificate in Justice and Peace from the Maryknoll Institute. But I also want to tell you, she had a very interesting experience here in Pasadena. In 1969, she was one of 27 persons who was chosen to come up to a program, a space physics program, at the Jet Propulsion Lab. She was one of only 3 women in this group, and she was able to meet with the astronauts who had just come back from landing on the moon. So, do we realize what an extraordinary person that we have with us this morning? So not only does our education form us, but our families as well. Veronica is the daughter of Quentin Brand, who was one of the first persons to fly from London to Cape Town in South Africa. And because of that, he was knighted Sir Quentin Brand. So every once in a while, I call her Lady Veronica. But also her mother, Mildred, who was of English-Irish descent. And she, I think Veronica reflects from her mother, her solidarity and her ability to transcend boundaries. Her mother left the comfort of England to go with her father to then southern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and they really lived in the bush. Veronica showed me a picture of it one time. So from her mother and father, I think she has the gift of being a global citizen, and I think a person who's very adventurous, passionate, and compassionate. I believe that Veronica is a Renaissance woman. She's interested in many things, and she's developed skills in many different areas. She's a whiz in math. She was my boss when I was provincial treasurer, and in a gentle yet firm way, she reminded me several times that I missed financial deadlines. She is a linguist. She speaks Portuguese fluently, Italian, French, and she's a wonderful translator, and she even can translate from Spanish into English, never even having learned the language. She's a lovely singer. She plays the guitar. She's a formidable Scrabble player, which I learned to my chagrin when she always won when we lived in Rome together. But seriously, I think that she's like her predecessor at the UN, at our NGO, Rita Arthur. She was called, I think, from all time to serve in this role. She's a global citizen. She knows how to make connections. She is passionate. She recognizes the urgency of standing with women and children so that they gain their rightful place in our society. She's passionate about many global issues: trafficking, mining and extractive processes, work with the girl child and the environment. For me, Veronica is one of the most humble, very smart persons I know. I think if John Gaiac, who wrote many letters, wrote to Veronica today, he would address her as his dear and beloved daughter. So I am most proud, though, to call Veronica my sister, my friend, a global citizen, a person of great compassion and passion.
Kathy, I'm speechless. You just silenced me. Thank you for those very generously welcoming words with more details than I would have even begun to imagine that you knew. Thank you. And just one little correction. When the astronauts, we met them over the telephone because they were in quarantine. And we were in the center and we spoke to them on the internal quarantine. But it was an exciting moment. So thank you, and thank you to Joan and to the council and to the province and to all of you for this lovely warm welcome. And I just hope that I can do justice to what you are asking today. So I invite you to journey with me as we try to open our minds and hearts, because it's not only up here, to a new global consciousness. And I'm going to be using a lot of PowerPoint, so I hope it doesn't make anybody dizzy, and I hope it will be helpful. Because what I'd like to do today, first of all, as we celebrate this 166th anniversary of our foundation in Béziers, I think it's very fitting that we do it in that spirit of looking back and looking forward. And before we received Sister Rosa's letter, I had already thought of Dag Hammarskjöld's beautiful phrase, which, when we were in the novitiate, was a banner that hung on many walls. For all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. And I think that saying I found in Pope Francis's words in Rosa's letter for the year on consecrated life. To be able to look to the past with gratitude, to live the present with passion, and to embrace the future with hope. And I think that is a challenge. So what I'm going to invite you to do with me is, first of all, we're going to take a little glimpse, because we have to look back to our origins. And my apologies to the non-RSHM, but I invite you to share our story too. Because we have a challenge that came out of our last general chapter. And it is a challenge rooted in those gospel values of inclusion, mutuality, and compassion. We choose to be more effectively involved in changing unjust structures. And how? By engaging with others, and that's what we're doing today too, in dynamic partnerships for mission through collaboration, networking, and advocacy. Now, I am hesitant to do anything on the sources in this province because I think you have done such a wonderful job. You have a rich tradition with Mary Milligan, with all her writing, with the beautiful work that you did with the study guide of our histories, the bicentenary celebrations, the groups. Kathleen Connell spoke to you a couple of years back. and Gabriel Corbally last year. So it's difficult to say something new that has the power of convocation, but I'm going to try. And I'm going to use those 3 words, and we're going to start with GAIAC, and we're going to go to the UN afterwards. So it's collaboration, networking, and advocacy. And so let's begin in Béziers. And I think, you know, as we look back, that commitment, we remember immediately Father GAIAC and Apollonie, Mother St. John. And I'd like to look at him especially through this lens of collaboration, networking, and advocacy. And I'm going to begin with a very quick story, and it's a personal story. I don't think I've ever told it before. In about 1997, we were actually emptying out the mother house, we as RSHM, because some of it was going to be sold and the remainder was going to be transformed. And so I was in Béziers for a meeting, and the sisters in France had gathered everything from the hidden corridors and the old rooms, and everything was displayed in the Bon Pasteur Chapel, for those of you who have been there, and in the old chapel. And Bernadette McNamara called me over, and she said, I think you would be interested in this box. Now remember what Kathy said, I was General Treasurer at the time. So I opened up the box, and what did I see? There were piles like this size, about this thick each, with a year on the front. 1887, 1888, 1890, I forget which the other years were. And they were tied with bits of sheeting with a nice little bow. And feeling as though I was walking in history, I took one out. It was an invoice. The invoices were arranged from January 1st to December 31st. And as I pulled out those invoices, it was like a window into the people, the world in which Father GAIAC moved. And, oh, I'm moving too fast. It was like a window into that world. I saw what the orphans ate, the name of the haberdasher who sold things, the people who supplied produce. I even saw Father GAIAC's tax returns. And I said, when I'm not General Treasurer, I want to come through and explore these, and I haven't been able to do that. Now, what has that got to do with collaboration, networking, and advocacy? I'm going to come back to that. But I told you that story because for me, it made very real something of Father GAIAC's collaboration. You know, there he grew up in that house, right in the shadow of St. Aphrodite's. Think of the people with whom he collaborated. You know, Father Martin, all the people who wandered through those streets in Béziers in the 1800s. The people whom he befriended, and of course very early on, whoops, going too fast, very early on, Eugène and Apollonie, their friendship, their support, the people he collaborated with in his first works as he saw the needs, which we'll come back to in a minute, of the young women in Béziers. The lay people whom he entrusted the refuge to. The other sisters of Saint Maur, of Saint Joseph of Lyon, the Poor Clares, the priests of the diocese, the people in the municipality. Because we have letters that Father GAIAC wrote, how he wrote to the mayor and he wrote to the municipality. And in that collaboration, how often he made a request, and we'll come back to that. So collaboration is clear in our origins. And I think it's clear also later on in the life of Father GAIAC. When you think of our coming to the United States, because they met a laywoman on a boat, and Sarah Peters opened up an avenue, and here we came to the United States without him ever having come. What a great trust, what collaboration. As we look at our foundations in England and Ireland and Portugal, lay people, priests, others with whom he collaborated. So just a glimpse on collaboration. Networking, I think I don't think the word was ever used. I searched in his letters, I couldn't find it. But I think he did network because there were so many groups. And when his celebration of 50 years of ordination, and there's a beautiful description of all the categories of the orphans and the boarding school students and the young women from the preservation and everybody, and the bishop and the priest, there was a network of people who were linked to him. His seminary teaching, his work in the Hotel Dieu, in the refuge, the orphanage, the people he knew through the French School of Spirituality, the other priests. There are so many people. But perhaps the one I want to deal with a little bit more is to do with the women with whom he gave spiritual direction, the people in the parishes. And these, our first sisters, came from that diverse network, you might say, of people of all classes, with whom he was, to whom and for whom he was a spiritual guide. And so I think we can truly say that from his time, early on, in the 1830s, at the Hotel Dieu, the hospital, where, and I know Sister Gabriel spoke last year about, she stole my thunder because she even said something that I would have said, but I'll repeat it in case you weren't there. You know, he was born the same year as Victor Hugo, and I had never seen Les Miserables, but when I saw it, it gave me a whole new insight into Béziers at the time that Father Gaillac was chaplain in that hospital, and how these young women, who many of whom were probably trafficked into prostitution, they didn't use that word, but many of them may have been, that the poor people, the marginalized people, Father Gaillac became an advocate for them, if you think about it. And I think we don't often look through that lens. But just a few examples. You know, paying for the girls to go to the Montpellier refuge, writing and speaking of the needs, approaching some of the other congregations, looking for people to work with him. He wrote to Sister Eulalie at the Montpellier refuge, and he said, I have a favor to ask. One of the sheep he loves so much, God loves so much, the Good Shepherd, try to help. Adelaide is that sheep. It is for her that I am writing. He was doing advocacy for the young women whose situation he desperately wanted to address. Gaillac wrote to the municipality about the small stipend and as hospital chaplain, asking for an increase because he needed to support the orphanage and the refuge. He requested that the subsidy that they gave for the refuge would be increased. And I think it is good to remember that Father Gaillac was doing this 60 years before the first social encyclical. 60 years before. So I think in his advocacy, there was a wonderful, he was a prophet ahead of his time. And I think last Sunday, you know, he responded to the social needs of the most marginalized, the poor, while at the same time bridging the gap across the class structure to try and make a sustainable future possible and links that would support that. He saw the prophetic urgency to be translated into something that respected human dignity. And I think, you know, his charism, to know and really of faith and zeal, and when he did found us that beautiful call to know and love God, to make God known and loved so that all may have life. Last Sunday in the parish in Yonkers, the Capuchin the woman who was reading the intercessions, said a prayer that I suddenly thought of, and I said, oh, that makes sense. And she prayed for all those who are advocates for those in poverty and who are marginalized. May they have zeal. I said, I'm writing that down. So I had that sentence last Sunday. But, do we think of collaboration, networking, and advocacy through the lens of our origins? So I invite you to take just a minute, just to think. Is there a story you think of? Is there an incident or a person that comes to mind as we think of our origins and we think of Father Gaiac, the First Community, Mother St. John? Just take a minute, and if you'd like to buzz with your neighbor, that would be nice too, or share something. Just 1 minute, and then I'm going to call you back. And just for the sake of the RSHM, that call to collaboration, networking, and advocacy didn't begin last year. For those of you who are not members of our community, they are the chapter documents that go right back to 1975. And I think we find in them the roots of so much of what we are committed to and what we are expressing in our mission statement, in our chapter documents today. Now we're going to take a little journey to the United Nations, because we are part of that community of humanity. And that beautiful document, the Charter of the United Nations, expresses many of the values that we can resonate with as RSHM, and for which we often wish to advocate. And just, a reminder, my novice mistress was Ellen Marie, and she used to say, in case you haven't reread recently the Charter of the United Nations, in this case, there are some beautiful phrases there. Reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, the equal rights of men and women, of nations large and small. That is a powerful statement. Establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties, other sources of international law, can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. That's 1945. Is it still a challenge today? I think so. And as we look at the United Nations, just remembering that they have resolved to combine our efforts, collaborate, and accomplish these aims, and hereby establish an international organization to be known as the United Nations. So, sometimes we see alphabet soup. Does this look familiar? Okay, but before we look at that, when I say United Nations, what do you say? What comes first to your mind? Anyone like to say anything?
Security.
That's exactly what I think is true for most people. People very often are hearing daily about the United Nations in the context of Security Council world crisis issues. Some of this alphabet soup that's up here is to do with the United Nations, but the presence on the ground in different agencies. And just to share a few, I've only got a few copies of them, but I'll try to get more, and they can be multiplied. One of the sisters who has been working as an NGO representative for about 10 years said, I carry this in my pocket, and when anybody says to me, what does the United Nations really do? I pull this out. And this is what is on that little piece of paper that fits into your wallet. If it moves. United Nations provides, this is the most recent figures, but they're already out of date, food to 90 million people in 73 countries. FAO, World Food Programme, fights poverty, helping 370 million rural poor achieve better lives in the last 30 years. That through the agricultural programs. Humanitarian aid, 12.4 billion. I think that was long before the recent surge for Ebola crisis. Aid to help people affected by emergencies. Promotes health, maternal health, saving the lives of 30 million women a year. Through WHO, through various programs of UNICEF, etc. Vaccinates, this would be UNICEF, the Children's Fund. 58% of the world's children, saving 2.5 million lives a year. Human rights through 80 treaties and declarations. And just very quickly, even something like ending leaded fuel use in over 100 nations. Through the environmental program, combating climate change and heading up a campaign. Assisting, this figure is well out of date. It's now 50 million, I believe, if you take internally displaced refugees and people fleeing war, famine, or persecution. This year it shot up. Advances democracy, assisting some 30 countries a year with their elections. Keeps the peace with 120,000 peacekeepers, 16 operations on 4 continents. That's probably out of date too. So it is in that context that RSHM, we have an NGO ministry at the UN. And I know some of you do too, because I've already talked to one of the sisters who's linked to the Dominican Leadership Conference presence at the UN. Are there any others of those of you who are from other communities? Yes. That's right. I know Sister Justine. Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, so that's 2 other representatives who I know and work with. Our chapter document last year, or 2 years ago, highlighted some of the issues of the world. And what my feeling is, I said, I feel like this is the UN agenda because so much that's going on is linked to those issues. And at the chapter, what we said was we committed ourselves to strengthen our JPIC UN NGO partnership. And we wanted to have creative ways of making it dynamic and effective. And I hope that today's one of them. Kathy, is that right?
Yes.
Joan, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. We named a few areas: human trafficking, the girl child, and sustainable development for all. But let me tell you, that covers a multitude. And just to say that our leadership, that is the enlarged General Council. They came to the UN in October, just before they had an EGC meeting. And I think you'll recognize at least one person there, is that right? At least 2, yes. And that was wonderful support to have them come and to have the opportunity to share with them. And one of the things that we did when they came was to take advantage of the membership of RUN. It's not a gym club, it's not exercising. RUN stands for Religious at the UN. And that is a wonderful support group. It's an informal gathering of representatives of religious congregations at the UN. That's where I would meet Justine or Margaret Mace or the representatives of the other groups that you might be linked to. We relate to each other for support and sharing of information, resources. We share prayer together. And meetings are opportunities to come together to pray and reflect on our shared NGO responsibilities in view of our different charisms, and mission. But actually, they are very related. And when we look at it, and those are some of the groups up at the top, some of the joint groups, some of them have many. There are about 50 different Catholic religious men and women's organization, NGOs, belonging to Rome. Some, like ourselves, are individual congregations. Others are coalitions, made up of 6 or more, or 10 or 20 congregations. And I know in the Sisters of St. Joseph, you must be many. And the same thing with the Dominican Leadership Federation Conference. So if we put all of that together, look at the figure at the bottom. Together, the members of RUN are represented in 176 countries and represent hundreds and thousands of religious and collaborators around the world. So does that give us a potential for advocacy? If we collaborate and we link to our networks around the world. This was a wonderful resource, even for the EGC meeting. In the middle, 2 people over from Joan is Winifred, who is a Good Shepherd sister. She is the representative for the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. And she actually wows people when she attends something and says, I represent the Sisters of Charity of Our Lady of the Good Shepherd. We are present in 72 countries. And people take note. Now, the richness of that working together and that collaboration, I think, is the only way we can really work at the UN. That particular day, as Joan will remember, Winifred had shared something. And we were in the office of another group of sisters as we ate our sandwiches in between events. Another group that we belong to, and I'm sharing this before we move into the Millennium Development Goals because I think it's important to say something about how we are, where we are, and with whom we work at the UN. The Committee of Religious NGOs at the United Nations is religious in the broad sense of faith-based groups. And that is a very impressive group. For example, 2 weeks ago, we celebrated World Interfaith Harmony Week. It was a powerful moment. And the more that there are events and wars and conflicts in our world where religion is often blamed, and maybe it isn't the religion at all, because as we listen, what do we hear? I'll just share one thing. This was one of the World Interfaith Harmony Week celebrations. This young woman, and if you read in the newsletter that I just put out, she is the representative of the youth representative of the World Parliament of Religions. And she spoke powerfully at that event 2 weeks ago. And she said, I was a child on September 11th, 2001. I was in New York. And she said, I felt my Islamic faith was hijacked. And she said, now I have come to believe, after this time, that diversity is a resource that I need to use working with others to really claim the common ground of our shared values. That is what religious at the UN is really, I think, about. And just referring to the abolition of nuclear weapons, one of the most powerful sessions I attended was when representatives of 11 different faiths, one after another, said it is morally unjustifiable to hold nuclear weapons. Nobody was disagreeing. They said this should be the moral compass. So there is a sense of incredible unity on the basis of shared values. moving outside of the faith-based into the broader, we have ECOSOC status. Now, what does that mean? That really is the Economic and Social Council. So many of the issues to do with social progress, with economic reality, with the MDGs, sustainable development, all of that comes under the umbrella of ECOSOC. And now that we have ECOSOC status, the way that I can describe it, I think the best thing to do is to say it's like at a chapter, for those of you who are not RSHM but have general chapters or gatherings or convocations or whatever, you have an active voice and a passive voice. And ECOSOC is the active voice, really. You can speak. You can write a statement. Now, there may not be many opportunities to speak. You may have to struggle and very rarely speak. But you can get up in a conference, a big meeting, and say, I am so-and-so, I represent the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, or the Dominican Leadership Conference, or the Sisters of St. Joseph. So one of the crucial things, I think, that through our ECOSOC status, and I'm going to show you a few slides that will make that clearer, is that we have networks. We have people on the ground. We may be in 14 countries, not in 72, but let's make that voice be heard. Let us be the advocates for the people, for the migrants that are struggling to have their rights recognized, for the children in Africa that struggle because they get raped on the way to school, for the women who spend all day carrying water that's infected and therefore they get sick and their children get sick. We can be advocates in a powerful way, even though it may be to push a word, to keep reiterating a human right. With our ECOSOC status, what does it mean? And I'll just run through these and then I'll give you a few examples. We do have additional passes for entry to the UN, and that's very nice. We can invite people to come to things when you come to New York. We can participate in high-level meetings and conferences. For example, Kathy participated last year in the Commission on the Status of Women and was able to come in, and I was able to register her for that, just as Mary Leah this year will be participating. We are able to sign interventions and statements, and we can do that in the name of the NGO and indirectly of the whole congregation. We can submit a written statement that we write. We haven't done that yet, but at our meeting with the JPIC network animators, we would hope to do that. We can make oral interventions, and we have numerous networking and lobbying opportunities. We can register side events during commission meetings, and I'll show you an example, and we can attend the deliberations of ECOSOC. So just to prove that Kathy wasn't having a holiday in New York last year.
It was cold.
It was cold. Okay, so that was the Commission on the Status of Women in March of last year, and Kathy was with us for a week. All right, sometimes we are working with those groups of others, religious, but also other professional global groups. It might be CAFOD or Oxfam or Caritas Internationalis. It might be the League of Women Voters. So sometimes we don't always agree with everything, but we tread the gentle path of dialogue and working together. One group would be the Working Group on Girls. And they have a speak out on the Day of the Girl, which is a wonderful opportunity for young people to have a voice, even old people, The sister on my left is a presentation sister from Zambia, with whom I have worked in Zambia. Day of the Girl, Innovate to Educate. And it gives us the opportunity. That was a group of girls connected to the Loretta sisters who came from Canada for the Day of the Girl and took part in a whole program to raise awareness and to have their voice in the informal environment shared. Now, I'm proud to say that the Western American province collaborated, thank you, Pat, and the place called home, to a survey that was done about girls' experience of violence. And we were able to get responses from our people on the ground in Brazil, 8 different places, in the Zambezi region, 3, and a place called home in WAP. That feeds into the information so that it's not just for us, but for others. Now this is an example of, this is an advocacy sheet that is being used by the Working Group on Girls as I speak, well not on Sunday, but tomorrow and the next day. There will be groups going of 2 or 3 members to missions to the UN, and that's not a Catholic mission like as in California. That means an embassy in this case. And they would be going to share these concerns and to talk about, with a representative, about how that country is taking this forward and why we believe that these 3 areas are very important for the Millennium Development Goals and then for sustainable development. I just give one example from this. Under Empower Girls, promote universal birth registration. Do you know that something like 40% of girls in Zambia, in the rural area, would not have their births registered until they're much older? We had a girl go to the novitiate in Brazil, and what she had to do was get a birth certificate so she could begin to get a passport. So something as, and if you don't have a birth certificate, you don't have an identity. And what does that mean in terms of your vulnerability for human trafficking? So each one of these could be elaborated on. But it's just, I'll leave you an example of this with Kathy, but this is like an advocacy sheet that we would use. The NGO Committee on Migration. This is a huge, it's a very active group, and I try to attend meetings because I know your commitment and the Eastern American province's strong commitment. I cannot be involved in everything. But what we were able to do, this terrible situation of deaths, you know, on the boats crossing the Mediterranean, coming through the border from Mexico. We have recently signed, and I will leave a copy, a statement. We were able to join with 300 other groups in really calling for the human rights of migrants to be recognized at sea and in transit. And we have signed on to what was called the Stockholm Agenda, which highlights 8 points about the human rights of migrants. Trafficking, we belong to the NGO committee, which is dedicated to the eradication of human trafficking. And there again, education, advocacy, research, monitoring. And what are some of the ways? Raising awareness, the gift box. I don't know if any of you have heard of the gift box. At the time of the Super Bowl, it was built and put in Union Square in New York. And the idea is people get curious, what's in this gift box? And they go in, and there is the information about human trafficking. And this one on the right is Ginny Dorgan, who is the chair of our JPIC committee in the Eastern American province. So we join with initiatives like that. This was a wonderful opportunity to join with another congregation, the School Sisters of Notre Dame. And I want to show you the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. We co-sponsored that. And we had Leif Korlim from CNN and the Freedom Project about human trafficking. But we also had a group of girls from a school run by the School Sisters of Notre Dame. And they produced a little DVD, and that is on the web. And I can give you the link. I showed the girls at Marymount High School the other day, because it's a good example of you don't have to be in New York to send a DVD, to contribute. And Leif Collin from CNN was so impressed by those girls and what they produced as a tool for human trafficking. Financing for development, even though I did do a little bit of financing, this is the hardest thing you could belong to. And it's the one opportunity, a couple of times, I've had to speak out. You'll see me sitting in front of NGO at a big high-level meeting. It was one of the 2 times that I've been able to speak out. And again, this committee, why are we dealing with financing for development? One of the reasons is this: the world is overarmed and peace is underfunded, said Ban Ki-moon. That horrific figure sitting at the bottom, this is in the United Nations. And it turns over constantly because every minute more money is being spent on weapons. And it's since midnight last night when I took that picture. I can't even read that figure. I don't know how you say it in this continent, 300,000 million since midnight last night. And what does that mean? This is on the wall. Global military expenditure, over on the left. This is the UN regular budget. And this is military expenditure. So, in financing for development, we do have to have a voice for resources to be used for human dignity, for social progress, for women, for girls, for all that gives people life. At the World Bank in Washington, they're beginning to change their tune, and there have been some very good events. That was one that we were at last year. There's an Indian medical missionary of sister above and myself below. Ban Ki-moon, the head of the World Bank, who once was boycotting the World Bank in '98 and is now the head of the World Bank. So it's beginning to make a bit of change. The mining working group, Kathy mentioned this, and just to say, this is something that for Mozambique, for Brazil, is very important. And for Zambia and for Zimbabwe, the issues to do with extractive industries. It's where we have been able to join our voice and speak out and call for a rights-based approach to resource extraction in the pursuit of sustainable development. And that's where alone you could do nothing, but as a very active group with the Sisters of Mercy taking the lead, they are beginning to be really strongly appreciated. I'm going to move very quickly through this because I want to get to the MDGs. The RSHM sponsored event was on empowerment lessons from the grassroots. And we were able to do that, just to give you an example. Here we are with some other congregations, with the Permanent Mission of Zambia to the United Nations, and the NGO Committee, the International Schools of Social Work. So collaboration. We were able to put something on and run it together. Civil society, I wanted to share that picture with you as we remember Rita, whose work really, grounded us, and her vision moved us into this ministry. That was last August, just before she had her surgery, at the DPI conference. 2015 and beyond, our action agenda. So at this point, and just 2 other groups of how we work, we did have a group of students from LMU, from Anne Murphy in Ireland, and of course through the International Network of Schools, and Mary Ellen will remember that, from Colombia last year. So at this point, I'd like you to take 2 minutes, because we've still got another little theme. Can we take 2 minutes to just buzz or sit in silence, whichever you prefer?